The impostor who saved lives. Ferdinand Demara, Her Majesty Canadian ship Cayuga at the cost of assumption. In war, uniforms matter. Rank matters. Title matters. Authority matters. When a man wears the right insignia, speaks the right language, and stands in the right place and maintains the proper composure and courage of their rank, there will be no room for questions or doubts. Everyone around them will assume competence, they will assume legitimacy, they will assume safety, and that assumption can be fatal. In 1951, aboard a Royal Canadian Navy destroyer operating in the Korean War, every sailor on board trusted the man responsible for their lives in medical emergencies. They trusted his rank. They trusted his title. They even trusted his uniform. What they didn't know was that their ship's surgeon lieutenant had no medical training at all. His name was Ferdinand Waldo Demara Jr. And this is the story of how a lie passed inspection and what happened because of it. This is orders and consequences. The Korean War placed extraordinary strain on all United Nations forces at sea. Ships were needed. Crews were needed. Specialists were needed immediately. For the Royal Canadian Navy, one shot it mattered more than most. Qualified medical officers. Under peacetime conditions, commissioning a naval surgeon is slow and deliberate. Credentials are verified. References are properly checked. Backgrounds confirmed. Time is taken. But war compresses standards. In March of 1951, Waldo Demara walked into a recruiting office in St. John in New Brunswick, presenting himself as Joseph Seale, a qualified Canadian physician. He had stolen the real Dr. Seale's identity and credentials. What should have taken months took days. Demara was commissioned as a surgeon lieutenant and assigned to Her Majesty Canadian ship Cayuga, a tribal class destroyer deploying into a war zone. The system needed a doctor, and the system accepted one without truly knowing who he was. Once on board, Demara had what mattered most inside any military hierarchy: a commissioned rank, a uniform, and a role people recognized, and authority no junior sailor would dare challenge. But he lacked the one thing that actually mattered, at least in his own case: skill for his profession. His survival in his role depended on two things. First, his extraordinary intellect and ability to absorb information fast. And second, and more important, the competence of the people beneath him, the medical orderlies that worked with him, especially one. Demara's first real test didn't come from enemy action. It came from authority. The ship's commanding officer, Captain James Plomer, developed a severely infected tooth. At sea, infection isn't a small inconvenience. It can cripple leadership and compromise operations. Demara had no dental training. Refusing wasn't an option. So he did what would become his signature method. He withdrew back to his cabin, studied a manual intensively, and then performed the extraction. Guess what? it worked. The captain recovered. And on warships, especially in war situations, trust can harden into certainty very quickly, especially once the commanding officer is satisfied. From that moment, no longer questioned. This is where the story becomes less about Demara and more about the systems, or a competent system. Demara's sick berth attendant, Petty Officer Bob Hurchin, was a trained naval medic, an experienced one at that. Hurchin handled routine medical work, injuries, infections, day-to-day care. His competence created a buffer. This allowed Demara to focus only on the complex cases, the ones that demanded doctor-level decisions, often studying the procedure shortly before acting or carrying out the surgeries. In military operations, systems often survive not because leaders are flawless, but because subordinates carry out their tasks efficiently. Hurchin didn't just help Demara, he stabilized the ship's medical function. Following a commando-style raid off the Korean coast, the Kaeyuga took on board 3 critically wounded South Korean guerrillas. This was not routine care. It was a mass casualty situation under operational conditions. Under normal circumstances, a ship would have options: signal for medical support, transfer casualties, or delay major procedures until conditions improved. But off the Korean coast, none of these options were available. The Kaeyuga was operating in contested waters. External support was not immediate. Medical evacuation was not available. The unspoken order was simple: treat them now or they will die. Demara faced the moment every impostor fears, the moment of truth, the moment the system demands performance, not theatrics, not more paperwork. Two of the wounded required immediate medical surgical intervention. One had a bullet lodged in his chest. Another required the amputation of a foot. These are complex procedures, even in a regular hospital, with all the attendants, assistants, and help. Demara, with his limited staff, performed them in a ship's sick bay. The third casualty did not require surgery, but suffered severe trauma and blood loss and needed urgent stabilization, shock management, wound care, and sustained medical attention. Against expectation, all 3 survived. No one died. This is a paradox at the heart of the Demara story, an institutional failure that improbably did not produce catastrophe, as would be expected. Rather, it produced survival. There is another figure in this story who has to be acknowledged: the commanding officer. Captain James Plomer never really ordered Demara to operate, but by allowing him to continue in the billet, he unknowingly assumed responsibility for every outcome of Demara's. In naval command, authority does not disappear because competence is assumed. If the surgeon fails, the consequence does not stop in the sick bay. The captain gambled unknowingly on a lie. However, In this case, the gamble paid off. Demara's success didn't expose him, at least immediately. It protected him before eventually exposing him again. The crew's confidence hardened further. Officers and men of the ship recommended Demara to high command, and success attracts attention. War correspondents picked up the story of a heroic Canadian naval surgeon who performed extraordinarily well under fire. Reports circulated beyond the ship, beyond the fleet, all the way back home. In New Brunswick, the real Dr. Joseph Sears family recognized the name, and that was the beginning of the end. While the Cayuga operated near the mouth of the Yalu River, a signal arrived from the Naval Service Headquarters, designated as Captain's Eyes Only. And in terse military language, the signal read, "Have reason to believe your medical officer is Impostor. Investigate and report." The system finally looked closely because the world was looking. Now the Royal Canadian Navy faced a problem with no clean solution. Prosecuting Demara would raise questions the institution did not want on the front page, especially during wartime. How did this happen? Who failed to verify? How many other vulnerabilities exist under pressure? In war, institutions often choose silence rather than scrutiny. Demara was quietly released from service. He was even given back pay and credited for active service. He was escorted to the US border and deported to the United States, his country. There were no trials, no public scandal, no extended spectacle. Order was restored. The consequences were contained. Demara later described his actions when he was asked. He responded simply as rascality, pure rascality. This story isn't about admiring a con man. It's a case study in what wartime pressure does to institutions. When urgency compresses standards, verification becomes assumption. When a bullet must be filled, paperwork can outrank truth. And when authority is visible, competence is often presumed. And sometimes, by luck or nerve, or the competence of the support people around, the system survives a failure it shouldn't have survived. Ferdinand Waldo Demara was not a doctor. He was not a Canadian. He was not supposed to be there, but he was there. And because of what happened on board Her Majesty Canadian ship Cayuga, this remains one of the most uncomfortable lessons in military history. Sometimes the outcome may be good, and the system is still wrong. This is orders and consequences. Thank you for staying with me till the very end of this story. See you on the next one. And don't forget to share, like, and subscribe.